Today I'm going to talk to you about spies, agents, and secret reports, but not about the CIA, MI6, or the KGB. What if I told you that long before nation-states even fully emerged, the world's first real corporate intelligence agency was created by a company, not Buckingham Palace, not a ministry in London. The brain of this network was inside a profit-driven joint stock corporation, the British East India Company. And here's an even more provocative question. What if the seeds of everything we call corporate data, market intelligence, and geopolitical risk reporting today were planted on the desks of this company trading in Asia in the 18th century? In this video, I will tell you how the East India Company transformed from a merchant enterprise into a tax-collecting empire, and then into a semi-covert intelligence machine operating independently from kings. And in the end, you won't help but wonder, do states monitor companies today, or are companies the ones running the world with data? Founded in 1600, the British East India Company began as nothing more than a trading company chasing spices and textiles. Investors in London put capital into ships. In return, they shared the profits that would come from the Far East. But by the 18th century, the picture had radically changed. The company had its own military forces, a private army. It made agreements with local principalities and gained tax-collecting privileges. After 1765, by obtaining the Dewani rights in Bengal, it began managing the tax revenues of millions of people. At this point, it was no longer just a trading company. It had become a company state, a corporation that waged wars, collected taxes, and governed lands. And such a structure was desperately hungry for one thing: information. Which prince was forming a secret alliance? Where was rebellion brewing? Which banker was financing which rival power? In which port were prices falling, and where was famine beginning? Because every mistake here didn't just sink a few ships, it could collapse the company's entire balance sheet and stock price. This is why the East India Company began building a systematic intelligence network that went far beyond trade reports. The company's first agents were not spies in the modern sense. They were commercial representatives called factors, officials in ports like Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta who bought and sold goods on the company's behalf, also reported everything happening around them. But over time, trade gave way to politics. The company began sending residents into the courts of Indian principalities, a British political representative beside the Nawab of Bengal, others in the courts of Hyderabad, Awadh, Urdu, and the Maratha states. Under them, Indian clerks, translators, and intermediaries fluent in local languages. These individuals operated as both official envoys and the heads of corporate intelligence. They transmitted palace gossip, tax collection problems, troop movements, and the positions of local bankers in secret reports to Calcutta and London. These reports were often written in cipher, stored in separate political and secret files, circulated only through channels accessible to a small inner leadership circle. In London at East India House and in Calcutta, archives called the Secret, or Political and Secret Department, look today like a hybrid of a foreign ministry and an intelligence archive. While the company calculated divan revenues and trade profits, it was simultaneously reading the intentions of rival powers. In short, between the lines of the balance sheet, intelligence notes were circulating. So how did the East India Company gather information? The methods look extremely familiar to us today. 1. Networks of local informants. The company built a vast network of informers through merchants, palace officials, travelers, bankers, and even officers in rival armies. When a rumor of rebellion arose, the report often reached the company weeks before it became public. Assis, new tax decisions, customs duties, grain prices, all were collected regularly under what we would call market intelligence. 2. Surveillance through mail and communication. The company controlled postal lines and courier routes in its territories. In critical times, letters were opened and copied. Suspicious correspondence was sent to the political department. Couriers carrying messages were interrogated. Every caravanserai on the trade routes was effectively an information-gathering hub. 3. Mapping, surveys, and statistics. The company observed not only people but also land and resources. Land surveys, crop statistics, tax registers, river depths, road conditions, port capacities, and large-scale measurement and mapping projects that intensified in the 19th century. These looked like mere engineering tasks, but in reality they created a massive strategic data system for both trade and military operations. What we now call geographic intelligence and economic intelligence existed back then as handwritten ledgers on company desks. Every intelligence agency is tested in moments of crisis. Here are some of the East India Company's tests. The Battle of Plassey, 1757. The company manipulated factions, bankers, and commanders in the Bengal court, achieving victory with a small force against a massive army. The outcome was a product not of superior firepower, but of intelligence and bribery networks. The French threat in the early 19th century. During Napoleon's Egypt campaign and possible Eastern ambitions, company agents monitored French influence, both in Indian princely states and along the Basra-Red Sea route. The Great Rebellion of 1857, Sepoy Mutiny. This moment revealed both the existence and the limits of company intelligence. On one hand, the company had long been reporting local grievances and religious and economic tensions. On the other hand, it underestimated the scale and speed of the revolt. The rebellion was crushed, but the cost was immense. The company's reputation collapsed. London began questioning how a private company exercised so much power, and ultimately the East India Company was dissolved, and India was transferred directly to the British Crown. The irony is striking. The company had built what was essentially a modern corporate intelligence machine, but blinded by profit-driven politics, it failed to fully see the storm it was creating. Now let's jump from the 19th century to the 21st. What do we discuss today? The user data collected by multinational corporations, the private security and intelligence networks of energy giants, country risk reports of financial institutions, the influence of big tech firms over political processes. All of this reminds us of one question. States appear to be monitoring companies, but are companies actually reshaping the world through data? Looking at the story of the East India Company, we see that this question's roots stretch back 300 to 400 years. Unlike medieval bankers, this company had its own army, its own tax system, its own intelligence network, and a governance structure responsible to shareholders. In a sense, it created the fusion of the first global corporation plus the first corporate intelligence agency. We can draw at least 3 clear lessons from this story. 1. Information comes before capital. The East India Company's greatest advantage was knowing before its rivals which port was in crisis, in which palace a succession struggle would erupt, which banker had changed sides. Once information arrived, capital, armies, and diplomacy were just instruments. Even today in the world of finance, insider information, market intelligence, and country risk analysis remain the most valuable assets. 2. Corporate intelligence without boundaries makes democracy fragile. The East India Company was accountable not to local populations, but to a board of directors and shareholders in London. Its intelligence network worked not for the security of a nation, but for the profitability of a corporation. Today, the capacity of global companies to collect data, influence politics through lobbying, conduct risk analysis behind closed doors can create an impact sometimes stronger than national parliaments. 3. When companies start behaving like states, states begin thinking like companies. At one point, the East India Company became a company state that declared wars, collected taxes, produced laws. This ended in a massive crisis in the 19th century. Today, however, we see the reverse. States behave like corporations, presenting balance sheets for investor confidence. Companies act like small states, gathering intelligence, providing security, affecting foreign policy. This blurring may become one of the greatest conflict zones of the future. Today we cannot help but ask, will the greatest intelligence agency of the future belong to a state or to a corporation? Whoever buys information controls the flow and sees risks before anyone else. That's who is pricing the future. And let's close with your channel's signature line. If what I've shared today helped you see the world from a different perspective, don't forget to subscribe. Because history always has an answer, you just need to look from the right angle. And I'm here to help you find those answers buried in the dusty pages of financial history.